Hi guys, I am going to go through these notes kind of quick so that it's a shorter video. I'm going to push out this copy of these notes to you so that you have them already filled out. We're just going to talk about them real quick. So the basic things that we're going over right now are the definitions of points and lines and rays and planes. And this is a very, very important part of geometry and just the introduction. And so I really hope that you're sticking with me and you're going to practice it here in a second. So first thing we're going to talk about is what a point is. A point is an exact location in space with an indefinite shape and size. And so when I'm talking about the kind of geometry that we're talking about, there's different kinds of geometry, and it's something that we can get into if you're interested in it. But we're working with something called Euclidean geometry. And Euclidean geometry is when we're talking about flat spaces, flat planes, lines that extend forever and ever in a straight direction. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but here we've got what is a point? Well, a point doesn't have any shape. It doesn't make any difference how big I draw my dot. It doesn't have a size, but when you see a point in that, when we talk about a point, we are going to put a dot next to it, and we're going to put an uppercase letter. Okay. So when I go to name this, or label is another thing that we are going to call this. You can either use the word point, or see if this will show up down here, or you can just use the letter that we've got. Yeah, it's a little dark, isn't it? All right, so when I talk about the next thing we're going to talk about is a line. People mess this up a lot, so I really need you with me on these. A line in what we're going to talk about is something that extends forever, an object with no thickness that extends infinitely in two directions. So if you really, really think about it, and you and I can talk about this later, do we live in a world where lines go on forever and ever in a straight direction? And what would the world look like if it was? So anyway, for our purposes though, we're just going to talk about what if it did, okay? So this is kind of like the basic geometry. And so we've got, these, any 2 points really define a line. And as long as you've got 2 points, you can draw a line through them. There are an infinite amount of points between those two lines, or between any of those 2 points. It's just that we've only labeled a couple of them. And you can see at the end here, that means they go on and on when you see those arrows drawn. And so all I need is any 2 points on here, which is why we've got so many different ways we could name these. And really, there's an infinite amount of ways, because I could draw in here more, dots than what I've got. And I could draw in here, let's say, if I have a point here, I've got a point here, I've got an infinite, which means forever and ever. I've got a never-ending amount of points on this line. We just labeled a couple of them. And so the important things to remember here are you need 2 points to name them. You're going to have this segment bar on top, and you're going to see 2 arrows. The other thing to remember is that order of the letters does not matter. Just because you see 3 points labeled on here does not mean you put the letters C, D, and E. You only pick any 2 points that are on there. And then on top, you draw the bar, no points on the end, just the bar, and then the arrows on both sides. Next thing we're going to talk about is, what if I'm talking about just a piece of that line? And that's what we call a line segment, which is down here. So a line segment is just part of that line consisting of 2 endpoints and all the points in between them. So like up here, we had, you know, a few segments we could have named. We could have named segment CD, DE, CE, that would have been these. And it didn't matter what order. In this case, we're talking about segment GH. Doesn't matter what order you put the letters in, the endpoints are the letters that you use. Okay, so we've got G and H, and I've got these dots on the end, so I know I'm just talking about just that chunk of that line. And I could have written it as GH or HG, and I do not put dots on the end. The fact that I don't have the arrows means I'm only talking about that piece though. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is array, and I want you to think about, when do I see array? Well, you think of array, you might think of a ray of sun, a beam ray, something like that. So a ray is just a part of a line consisting of an endpoint, and in this case, our endpoint here is M, and extends infinitely in one direction. So it's shooting off in this direction of N. Now, it doesn't matter if it was going this direction or this direction. When we name it, we always name it with the letter of the endpoint first, and then the direction it's shooting off to. Okay, we always start with the endpoint when we name it. Okay, that's important. And we always, always, always draw a segment bar and an arrow pointing to the right. It doesn't matter if it looks like this one up here that I drew in blue and it's shooting off in the other direction. If we had, say, an S here and a T here, S would still come first, T would be the second letter that we'd write, and we would still draw the arrow pointing to the right. And that's because I know that the letter underneath, where there's no arrow, is the endpoint, and the next letter is the direction it's shooting off in. Okay. While we are here, we're going to talk about opposite rays. Opposite rays are just rays that share a common endpoint. In this case, our common endpoint is T. Okay, and they continue infinitely in opposite directions. Really, opposite rays just form a straight line. And so, in this case, we've got T, and the ray TR is this ray right here. It starts at T and goes on to R. Okay, so ray TR is this one. And then ray TS is, let's say, starts at T, they share T. That's still not the right color, is it? It starts at T and then shoots off in the direction of S. So they share that endpoint, but they are two opposite rays. They need to form a straight line. And so when I'm naming it, I name it separately, right? So here's a good example of, it doesn't matter what direction my ray is shooting off in, it is always starting when I go to name it or label it with the endpoint and then the direction it shoots off in. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to talk about is a plane. A plane is not the kind of plane that you fly in, but the kind of plane that is a flat surface, and it continues infinitely in all directions. So I want you to think of, like, really technically don't really have any flat, or, you know, I want you, you could think about it this way. Do we have any flat surfaces that extend forever and ever? And if you think you can think of something, then I want you to come tell me. But a flat surface that goes on forever and ever and ever and ever is the way I want you to think about it. That's the kind of geometry that we're going to talk about right now. And so, you know, I want you to think of like a desktop or a floor or a ceiling, but imagine that like going on forever. Even though our picture looks like maybe a desktop or the floor or the ceiling, and it looks like it ends, it really doesn't. And the thing that is really important when we go to name this, you're going to see a couple things in here. If I zoom into my picture, okay, you're going to see that I've got 3 points here, X, Y, and Z, and I've got dots next to them, which means they're points on the plane. And any 3, and I've got this word non-collinear, we're going to come back to that in a few more definitions, but non-collinear just means they are not on the same line. So I can't draw a straight line through X, Y, and Z. But any 3 points that don't form a line, I can make a plane with. And again, there's an infinite amount of points all over this plane. I just haven't like named them with a letter. Okay, the one thing, so when I go to name these, I can either name them with the word plane, I have to have that word plane, and then the 3 points that I see on there, or I can name it with, sometimes you'll see a letter, an uppercase letter in the corner that is more of like a cursive or what we call script letter that doesn't have a point next to it. That's the only time I can only use one letter. So I can name that plane B, but only because it doesn't have a point next to it. It's uppercase and it's script and it's in the corner. It doesn't refer to a point. It's just kind of an easier way to label that word plane. All right, so we're going to stop now. We're going to pause. You're going to take a minute and go to the next sheet that I pushed out to you. So here you're going to see, oops, I didn't want to do that. That you've got pieces, I still have it on that, that you can manipulate and move around. And there we go. So you can click and drag these pieces, and they're all a bunch of pieces down here. And so you're going to do that, and then you're going to come check that with me in the Zoom room, if it's during class time or Wednesday during our my office hours. So see you soon.